All right, anyhow, I think we'll get started with this session. This is the session on industrial OT threat detection and response, and like I say, it's what's the right solution for your company. And what we're going to do is well, first, these are our sponsors. I keep telling everybody, please make sure you visit their booths and find out about them. There's a lot of bright people there that are more than happy to talk to you. And there's a lot of little demos and things like that, so I think you'll find it very interesting. Several of them relate to this topic in particular. Now, what I want to do here is I've got a presentation about 10, 15 minutes, I think. But one thing I find as an analyst is we've been doing market studies and studies on the topic. I used to call it anomaly and breach detection in the past because I think that was appropriate, and you'll see why in my presentation. Now I've kind of expanded that definition to OT threat detection and response because I think response is an important aspect, a very, very important aspect of it. So what do I mean by that? First of all, threats are anything that can jeopardize safety, operational continuity, or business continuity. It could be a cyber attack. It doesn't necessarily have to be a cyber attack. It could be a malicious action taken by some employee or an external party. It could be something unintentionally done by a user, by changing a program or something like that. What I mean by prevention when I use that is that it's the steps taken to reduce the likelihood of a threat becoming a reality. So you're trying to prevent it before it happens. Notice I have prevention, detection, and response. Prevention is doing something to try to keep it from becoming, the potential threat from becoming a reality. Detection is when it does become a reality, you're quickly detecting that you have that event. Now, if a plant stops or blows up, that's kind of obvious. You don't need it for that. But if somebody actually does a compromise on one of your devices for you to be able to detect that or something odd is happening. And then response are the steps that are taken after you have detected that you have the problem. And they include things like first investigating and identifying what's going on to understand what's happening that's odd here, and then doing something to block it or isolate it, and then finally doing something to remediate and recover. Now, I'm sorry, I have so many presentations, I'll get my own presentations all confused here. But anyhow, you can see on the left there's just a picture I had made where on the inside you have things like the goals of industrial systems or OT systems or safety, operational continuity, and business continuity are the three I usually frame. And around that to address those are risks that industrial organizations face. There's 4 things you can do for risk management. I used to teach risk management at university in business schools. And what you can do is you can avoid it. You can avoid it, you can mitigate it, you could transfer it, or you could accept it. And then around that are the kinds of things that are affected, like equipment malfunctions, loss of support systems, operator errors, and so on. And in the end, those threat mitigation things that I'm talking about are the prevention, detection, and response, which really are mitigation strategies. I'm not going to talk here about transferring risks. We do talk about that with cybersecurity insurance and things. Just accepting the risks or even avoiding the risks. The avoiding is more with the prevention side, okay? Now, so if that's what you're trying to do, we're talking about cyber threat mitigation is, again, prevention, detection, and response. One thing is that's what you obviously want to do. There's a lot of ways out there to do it these days that are recommended, a lot of standards like NIST and ISA, ISO standards, mostly around prevention, but they also have things in there for detection and mitigation. And that's what you get from the standards. And then our little model that I mentioned this morning, our cybersecurity maturity model, is really, we use that to tell people what should they do and when should they do it, okay, in terms of maturity. I already explained my model this morning, so I don't want to dwell on that again. If you remember, it's increasing levels of protection as you go across, but our point is you need to have the maturity to use that. But let me now use that model. The one thing I want to frame is if you look at those defenses, like the technology defenses and what people do, you can classify them in that sense. The first 3 steps that people generally do are prevention. You put in anti-malware software, you put in firewalls, you're trying to do things from keep people out. If you look at the monitoring side, which are even things like SIMs, anomaly and breach detection solutions and so on, that's really detection. And then the last thing is response. And by that, what we're talking about is using threat intelligence, doing something for incident management. And it can be in a very broad sense, or it could be incident management from a cyber perspective, just purely cyber perspective. But so as you go across, it goes from prevention, detection, and response. And one of the things I think is true is, if you notice, I kind of have it, I don't want to say it's strictly true, but as you go across in maturity, everybody should be doing prevention. If you're going to monitor, you better have somebody there to do something with it. It's like my alarm system, my infamous alarm system that I bought and nobody would pay attention to. Actually, I've been getting alerts all morning because we have a system in our house, and my son keeps walking around and triggering this camera that I have. And I keep getting alerts, but I'm not doing anything about it, so I'm not very mature. But then the last thing is the response side. And obviously, if you have a problem, somebody has to respond. But it's a question of how you do that. You either try to do it yourself, you have a formal system to do that, you have resources internally and so on to do it, but it requires a certain level of maturity to do that. Now, you may do it with internal resources, you may be going outside to get it, like with some cybersecurity service organization. The other thing I can point out with this model is if you look at those steps in the model, the first 3 are really trying to reduce the likelihood, that's what prevention is, that something will get into your systems. The other parts are focused on reducing the impact. And I think people are now becoming much more sensitive to impact. I think there's 2 reasons. One is there's a lot of defenses in place, so I think they are preventing normal things. Most people have in place the things to stop the normal stuff. And then you have the other case where you have a real attacker who's dedicated to get to you, you probably can't stop them anyhow. So the shift is now saying, let's manage that impact as fast as we can. And to do that, just the other point I want to make on the slide is reducing impact has 2 components. One is you want to try to constrain what they have access to, limit the potential impact that an attack could have. And the other one is to reduce the time it's needed to detect it and get it out of there, okay? This is an assumption here that the impact's a function of how long the person has to wreak the havoc. So it's not always true, but it's generally true, I think. So, and if you look in that area of detection and response, that's what we're talking about in this session. And it's really not just simply a technology issue. There's a lot of technology suppliers here today and that are out there. They all have solutions, but it's really a people, process, and technology issue. It's got all 3 elements to it. So now, let me classify, because as I mentioned, I've been following this for years, and I've talked to lots of companies and written lots of things about it. And I want to make sure I see differences in solutions. You may not, but I certainly do. So I see 3 different kinds of threat detection and response solutions. The first one in the column there I call vulnerability management. That's detecting that you have something wrong that you need to address. Its really focus is more on prevention. You're saying, I have this vulnerability, I'm preventing the fact that somebody might exploit that vulnerability. The people who are doing it can be like part-time OT staff or something. It's someone that's probably doing some scans that says, I got a vulnerability here. Then the question is, is there a patch for it? How do I get the patch? And how do I implement the patch? And things like that. So in essence, you're focusing on managing the vulnerabilities. I still call that a threat detection and response, but you're just kind of anticipating it. The other one is what we call anomaly and breach detection. And as I mentioned, this is a term we've been using at ARC for years, and I would say we used it in a broader sense before, but anomaly and breach detection to me is you're just detecting that something is abnormal happening. And you can detect that. It can happen in lots of ways. A lot of the solutions you'll see are focused on looking at messages and looking for anomalies in the messages, that somebody's talking to someone they shouldn't talk to, or someone is sending a command they shouldn't have sent. But likewise, there's anomalies that can happen within endpoints. And there are people that have solutions out there that could be like behavior monitoring and things like that. It could be behavior of the system, behavior of the people using the systems, UEBA, if you're familiar with that kind of stuff. I would classify all of those. That is my focus here today, but those all fit into that category. And to really use that, though, I think you need to have a full-time OT IT staff. You don't have to necessarily have a SOC, but you need people who are at least dedicated that if something is detected, someone is looking to see what that is. Because some of these solutions might be more like a SIM. Like if you have things in endpoint detection, they often report to a SIM product. And so somebody has to look at the SIM, or it's like me putting in my alarm system and not paying attention to the thing. It's a waste of money. Then on the right is what I would call threat management. So anomaly and breach is just looking for anything anomalous, anything that's funny. We use the term breach too. Breach is something that happens within an endpoint. Anomaly is with something in the messages. That was just a Sid Snitkin definition. Threat management is where you're more trying to look for real cyber threats. Now notice in the middle one, if you have a device that's failing, if somebody downloads some software accidentally and changes something they shouldn't have changed and you get some funny messages going, you want to know that, but that's not a cyber threat. I don't call that a cyber threat. A cyber threat to me is when someone is consciously trying to attack your systems, get in through your defenses, and wreak something. And in that case, it's still a detection, but it also has a big response component to it. And I'll get to that in a few minutes. And the focus is to manage that cyber attack, because you're actively managing an attack now, a cyber attack. And again, the goal is to reduce the time to recognize and resolve the problems. And I think to deal with those, you have to have, again, it could be somebody in your company, it could be a third party that you contract, but somebody has to be there who has the cybersecurity expertise to be able to understand what's happening and why it's happening and what am I going to do with it, okay? So it's kind of increasing. I don't say one's better than the other, and part of my point actually is I think your maturity determines which one might work for you and what your goals are, okay? So I want to go through these now just a little bit. I got some slides here just to clarify what I mean by that. If you look at vulnerability management, in the left you have the OT system. I just have those, be it a plant or a SCADA system. Those are just classic kind of Purdue model pictures. But you have a few processes that go on there. First of all, you have something monitoring. And if you're talking about vulnerability management, it's probably something monitoring periodically, not continuously, but on some period basis. It's monitoring cyber assets and asset inventories. Generally, if you're looking for vulnerabilities, you're not looking at messages per se, you're looking more at endpoint assets. If you see something, when you do that monitoring, if you see something suspicious, you have to identify which assets have that vulnerability. Now, that monitoring could be monitoring of the assets, but it's also monitoring of the vulnerability alerts, the CVEs. So if you get CVEs, then your question is, well, do I have any of that? Where is it? Which ones do I have to worry about? Then once you find out that you have a vulnerability, you know where you have the vulnerabilities, then the issue becomes one of going out and getting a fix for that. And generally, a lot of people contact their suppliers. This, surprisingly, first when you say to somebody you get a patch and you put it in, they think it's an overnight thing you do. In most cases, it's much more. You have to coordinate with these suppliers and say, is there a patch? Have you tested the patch? You may have your own testing system. So it can be a long process, and you actually need a solution that'll help you schedule for that kind of thing. And when you finally go to implement it, and you actually have to schedule it and stuff like that. And there's solutions that will help you manage that process, the vulnerability management. It's one kind of solution. I think they're good, and I think everybody should have them. But anyhow, that's one kind. If we talk about anomaly and breach detection now, what we call anomaly and breach detection, you again have a monitor detect. You have a monitoring phase. This is monitoring in the sense that you're looking primarily, well, it could be at any kind of thing. You could have things monitoring network messages. Often they're passive type solutions in OT systems. It's on a continuous basis, but you also can have things that are monitoring the endpoint devices. You can do that with agents within the devices. You can do it by periodically scanning from externally and looking for changes in programs and things like that, configurations. Again, you can have tools. There are tools that can monitor behavior of people, as well as, some people are using these kind of tools today that monitor process behavior. Is this state a valid state for my process, or has something funny gone on? So all of those are part of anomaly and breach detection. But anyhow, if you see something that looks anomalous, first of all, you have to say, how do I detect it? And in order to detect it, there's kind of three ways. One is somebody put in policies, and you just said, this is valid, this is not. You create it on your own, and you update them as you need them, but it's a set you define yourself. The other kind, and I think you see more often today, is where you have something that automatically learns. It says, I'm going to monitor the system, and when I see something funny happening, and I'm going to establish some normality. And the good thing about that is it sounds easier. The bad thing is if you have something bad in there to begin with, it learns it very well and says this is perfectly normal. So you just have to be careful about that. And then, the other one is, in most solutions, the anomaly and breach detection solutions today tend to have something where they'll detect known threats. It's more like signatures or something specific happening, some IOCs that they'll detect. But anyhow, so you detect something. Once you detect it, then what happens in what I call anomaly and breach is then you go to a triage. And you just kind of say, is this thing, you got notified of an anomaly. Now you have to go through and say, is this a valid thing? Is this really a threat? Then you have to say, okay, if it's something that is funny, who do I get to really dig into it? It could be a process engineer, it could be an automation engineer, or could be a cybersecurity person. So you have to triage and figure out, is it valid? What's its relevance? Who should be support? What support you needed? And then you go and you get that support. Now these solutions generally, even though they may help the people with the triaging and stuff like that, that's not their main focus. My definition, it's Sid Snitkin definition. Anomaly and breach detection is to tell you something funny's happening. As an old automation engineer, I have great value just to know that. I even used to call this almost an automation system monitor. Forget the cybersecurity. I'm more focused on something funny happening here. And I see a lot of value in it. But once you get that notification, it's up to you to do something with it. And they can offer support. Contacts help you look at stuff, but that's not their main focus. Now the third kind, what I call threat management, is one where, again, you're monitoring things, same as pretty much the anomaly and breach detection, except oftentimes you're looking for more specific things. And then you get something, or you may hear of a threat, and so you put something in the system to monitor for that threat. It's more cybersecurity specific, in my opinion. Again, it could detect anomalies, other kinds, but it's more saying, I am looking for specific things, like lateral movements would be one, as opposed to something that just detects that a PLC keeps retransmitting or something like that. You're investigating and trying to identify, and it's looking for policy violations. In this case, it could be a cybersecurity policy, known threats, abnormal situations again. The big difference there is, and feeding into that could be things from SIM logs, other kinds of things could be coming in telling you what to look for. But it's really being driven, actually my picture's a little backwards because the process is almost being driven by the investigate, identify. You say, I'm looking to say, do I have this problem? And then the monitoring is telling you I have it or not. But it's a continuous thing and you constantly need data from lots of sources. Once you find out that you have it, the difference now is you know a lot more about what you have because you've been looking for a specific thing. So in that case, the question is you do something to block it or contain it. And you can do that with device controls, network controls, controls on people, all kinds of different things you could change. And then you go to a remediate and recover, where you actually say, okay, I know, immediately you say, hey, I'm under attack, it's this threat, I'm going to do this to stop them. I'm going to isolate them. But you still have to go through and get rid of the original thing, so you have to remediate and recover. So that's threat management. Now, just some other differences between them. And the reason I'm highlighting the differences, again, to sensitize everybody to when you look at these solutions and people come in, which problem are you solving? Which problem do I need? So the difference, I think, here is with vulnerability management, it's collecting data from the environment, but it's just data. It just says, here's a vulnerability, I have it in this asset. Anomaly and breach detection has taken that a little further. It's collecting a lot of data, but it's analyzing it and saying, is this something that's abnormal? So it's kind of converting more to information. The threat management, I think, is trying to do more than that. It's trying to convert it into true intelligence so they can match with things like, I have this threat. So it's kind of telling you things like, I'm under this kind of an attack, or this kind of strange thing is happening, so on. Let me see. I have this one thing here just because, maybe it's just me, who knows, but I found that when I dug deeper and deeper, and as you keep learning here, I mean, I thought my background, my PhD actually is around artificial intelligence and operations research and statistics and stuff, so I have no problem understanding what a system might do to detect anomaly. I get that, so I thought I'd do it. What I realized I didn't understand was what a cybersecurity person does when they're really trying to understand a threat and manage it and dig into it and find out what is really happening, where's it happening, who's doing it. And what I learned was really a lot of the investigation and identification process, there's different models that are used. Like on the left, if you're familiar, there's the kill chain thing, there's the other one, the diamond model. Dragos talks a lot about, I don't think it's just Dragos with the diamond model, but it's really a group of people who really come more from the intelligence side, which is the idea of intelligence is collect all kinds of information. And then you're trying to put these pieces together, like our intelligence. I'm not going to make any comments about intelligence, but anyhow, you get the idea. Where you collect lots of things and you try to make sense out of it. What's that telling me? And so there's a whole process that people go through to do that kind of stuff. Once they kind of detect it, and oftentimes you need guidance from other people who are experienced in it. It's not just buying a tool that says, you've got an anomaly, something is talking to something. In this case, you really need guidance from people who know how to do threat intelligence or, forensics. Forensics is after the fact, but with that mentality of collecting this stuff, saying, well, this looks suspicious, just like engineers do whenever you're troubleshooting an engineering problem. It's just, I'm not a cybersecurity, I was never a cybersecurity guy. Anyhow, through that investigation, it comes out with some specific attack details. And then you might want to have, the question is, what do I do about it? Now, I've kind of got some candidate threats or specific threats, so what do I do about stopping that? And again, that's where I think threat intelligence comes in. Previously, we didn't do much with threat intelligence. I mean, I think it's important, like we were talking this morning about sharing information, but I didn't know how you operationalize that. Here's more where you have people who are actively trying to put things together, and somebody says, oh, so-and-so had a similar kind of thing and it went like this, and so you start looking for certain patterns. So, but anyhow, using the threat intelligence and something that would give you guidance as to what do I do about that specific threat. And it could be device controls, network controls, people controls, things like that. And then you need the same kind of thing for remediation. Now, the technology, I'll take the whole afternoon. The technology requirements vary based on what you're trying to do. Again, I just want to sensitize everybody with respect to those kinds of issues that you have. What you're trying to accomplish is very important when you go to select what's right for you. That's why I framed it that way.